Hey, you are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co host, nuggs-the-final-girl.
And I'm your other co-host, Josh.
And today we have Griff, a horror author, streamer, and podcaster.
Hi,
Can you tell us a little bit where people can find you, what you do?
I am a horror novelist. I'm working on my debut novel called Griever. I'm also working on a short horror anthology called Places Hungry and Profane currently. You can find me at the House of Everlasting Shadow on all socials. And yeah, that's about it.
So, Nugs did not tell me this when she pitched me the idea of doing a husband-wife episode. I did not know that you were a novelist.
Yeah.
So I want to peel back the layers of that.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit about, are you at the stages where you can talk about it a little bit?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Let's see. So Griever is a novel at its core about four friends who are pitted against cosmic, impossible circumstances. Griever's a novel about four friends who are they're on a road trip across the desert toward California. They are celebrating one of the characters' beating of breast cancer. And they'll come to find out that they're being pursued by two separate immortal entities who have very different agendas and very different designs for them. And they will discover how they factor into a much bigger tapestry, a much bigger destiny. Um, but I write in kind of a combination of folk horror, cosmic horror, and new weird. And I focus a lot on the human element. I want characters who feel like people, to whom you relate, with whom you fall in love, and over whom you will inevitably shed a few tears as they meet different fates that are less than wholesome.
And that is the sign of a great storyteller right there that can get you invested. The last few books that I've read have been from various authors, but they make you care about the characters, and I'm just the time you get to the those death scenes, you're just like, crap, where's my tissues?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I like to think, I guess, of writing in general today as having more of a literary bent, and it just happens to be speculative fiction, just happens to be within genre boundaries. Um, but mostly I try to write people in extraordinary circumstances instead of just the sensationalism of horror.
I gotta
What?
ask. Go ahead, Emily.
No, I'm so sorry. I was gonna ask, what has been your favorite setting that you've written in?
My favorite setting that I've written in,
Mhm.
it's going to sound redundant, but the House of Everlasting Shadow. Um, my fiction has like a greater universe, metaverse, whatever the kids are calling fragmented realities these days. But yeah, so basically, our world in my stories is called the equilibrium. It is equidistant from like the abstract heaven, equidistant from the abstract hell, which are themselves multi-layered. And so the further you get from the equilibrium up into, I call it the radiant never end, the more heavenly, the more blissful life is, the more general, like positive energy kind of permeates things. And then the further you get down into the House of Everlasting Shadow, the worse things are. You know, like if you use us as the barometer, then like a few realities down from us, maybe famine is commonplace. Maybe, uh, we're not the top of the food chain a little further down. And then you eventually get into what I call the ungoverned hells, which is sort of like hinterlands between us and chaos. And so everything I do, from the novels I write to the episodic horror podcast that I'm writing, um, all takes place within the sphere, which is like the greater three-dimensional reality as we know it. And then once you leave the sphere, things aren't so recognizable to us.
That's really awesome, and I feel like that opens up this like endless, limitless stories to tell, like infinite possibilities of characters you can make, creatures you can encounter. And I gotta ask, like I'm a when it comes to books, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. A lot of like what you're describing me is reminding me of like It, Dark Tower, Stand by Me.
Sure.
Uh, is it like are you influenced by King at all? Like, do you have like influences that kind of made you want to pursue writing this type of genre?
Absolutely. Yeah. To answer your "Am I influenced by King" question, Roland Deschain is like one of the people who like made me the man I am today. Um, like the Gunslinger's Creed, like everything about the Dark Tower motivated me. From I read The Wasteland when I was 12, and
Jeez.
I fell in love with it at that time. I've been through to the tower, I think, like 7 times now. So yeah, you could say that I like Stephen King. Being from Maine, being a voracious reader at a young age, he was kind of like the meat and potatoes of what I had access to. Um, but beyond him, Clive Barker, Adam Neville, John Langan, um, Peter Watts, some of the greats like Matheson, Carl Wagner, like Lovecraft, obviously, even though he's kind of a barf on a turd as a guy. But
I'm
yeah,
so glad you brought up Clive Barker because I feel like Barker like has been one of my like literary like recents like that I've gotten into, and I
sure.
just feel like he doesn't get like enough like points of conversation, or like doesn't feel like he has like a seat at the table, kind of like almost feels like this like underground uh like you have to kind of like know wink wink about his like
Yeah.
stories kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people don't give him credit for like how much scope he has. Because of course he has stuff like the Hellbound Heart and the Scarlet Gospels, but he's also got like Imagica. Um, he's got things that range from whimsy to just absolute nightmarish. And I think that he also doesn't get nearly enough credit as a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, you talk about like books and like stories that like made you cry. I read Cabal
Oh yeah,
during lockdown, and I got to probably within the last like few pages, and I just remember like literally like audibly weeping.
oh yeah, yeah,
Um that story absolutely wrecked me. And like it was kind of that was the story. I was like, all right, like Barker, I will read anything this man does. And so I've really diving in like deep, but like, he's also like Weave World is also like
yep.
this like
Mhm.
big scope project, and one day I will tackle it. One day. It's very intimidating. But I gotta ask, like with it this being such a layered story, like are we looking at like one hell of like an impressive like debut? Like you talking like 500 to 1,000 pages, or are you talking like something a little bit more intimate?
Uh, I would say somewhere in between.
Okay.
I tend to be a little bit of a verbose writer. I'm a pretty descriptive guy, but I think that I've honed myself well enough that it's not a chore to get through. Uh, you'd probably be better off to ask Nugs, to be honest. She's my number one alpha reader. So, but Griever is going to be, I would say, closer to 100,000 words than 50.
I would
Root.
I would say definitely as I've been reading over your shoulder and giving you advice, I would definitely say that's a really accurate amount. It's going to be like a hefty book, but not like hefty.
Yeah, I'm not writing the stand. I'm not trying to come out the gates with the next great American novel. I just want to tell a good story.
Well, I think my last question before we dive into the film for this episode is gonna be obviously for those that are like myself listening to this right now, how far are we into the novel, and like how soon till we can read it?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I've got this horrible habit of writing multiple projects at the same time. I don't know what it is. I just kind of bounce around. So I would say I'm about 3/8 of the way through with Griever, and roughly the same through Places Hungry and Profane. but both of them are online to be published this year before 2024.
All right. Well, make sure that you guys are following uh Nathan's uh social media. We'll provide links in the bio description below, and we'll also get it from him one last time before the end of the show. But Nugs, what movie did you bring us to talk about today?
So I brought one of my go-to favorites that a lot of people don't know, and that is Spring.
Like
Yeah.
Moorhead and Benson's Spring.
Yes.
Yes, I love that film.
Yeah. I This was a first time watch for me, so a lot of this is going to be new. If you guys are curious about this film after we get done talking about it, you guys can stream it right now for free on Vudu, Tubi, and Redbox. And if you guys also have a Shudder or AMC membership, you guys can also stream it there. And it's also available to rent or buy exclusively through the Alamo on demand because, well, Drafthouse Movies produced this film, which did not know this was a thing until I watched this film. So,
I'm so glad that this was a first time watch for you because I love getting people's first reactions of this.
it's crazy because I have a friend that is like been trying to get me to watch this movie for the better part of like a year and a half. He just went through Shudder one day, was like picking random movies, and he came across this one. He's like, "You need to watch this movie." And he's like, I can't describe to you what it is. It's like this weird love story. Just watch it." And I was like, "Oh, okay, I'll get around to it." It's been literally on my list, ever on Shudder ever since that conversation. And I like my initial thoughts with this is a lot like Moorhead and Benson, is where I really like them as like filmmakers because they always feel like you're getting this initial type of movie and then something happens
Mm-hmm.
along the way and you get something else. And it kind of almost feels like David Lynch in that way. And he's one of my favorite
Sure.
filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
So I really enjoyed the way that this film just kind of got me, where like even when I thought I knew where this was going, I was like, oh, cool, this is a werewolf movie. And then you get to that scene and you're like,
Yeah.
nope.
They do such a good job of like um what is it? Subverting,
Subverting.
yes, your expectations. And they do it so beautifully. Like wow. Their movies are beautiful to look at. And I saw this thing where they weren't sure if they were going to bring a drone or not, and they ended up bringing a drone, and that ended up being a lot of their like really beautiful cinematic shots. And I thought that was really cool.
It's awesome. Yeah, there's still like another like I still have a handful of movies from them like I haven't seen. Like I've seen Synchronic, I've seen Something in the Dirt. I really liked that one. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet.
You still need to watch Something in the Dirt.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a
What
wild
was the
ride.
other one
The
of
Endless.
yes.
The Endless.
Yep.
Yeah, The Endless is another one that I need to also see from them. I think it's actually on Shudder, if I remember
I
correctly.
believe
But
so.
yeah, so like these guys I just need to like sit down at a weekend and just knock out their filmography, seeing what they provided for VHS, and I really like just their style of how they tell stories. I think these stories are really big in scope, but they also feel like really like personal and like really intimate.
Yeah, and I think Moorhead and Benson are a good example of how I guess the scaffolding of horror is changing as we move forward. We're abandoning a lot of the tropes, and we're abandoning a lot of the how do I put this delicately? A lot of the more tired elements of horror filmmaking.
Sure.
And I put Moorhead and Benson in kind of like the same arena as like Ari Aster.
Hmm.
You know, it well, Hereditary was definitely horror, but like Midsummer, The Endless, Spring, like these are like more nebulous in concept. And for me, I have a pretty big distinction between horror films and terror films. Horror films, the concept sticks with you. The concept is the insidious part that gets inside you. Like Robert Eggers, and then terror films are the ones that rely a little more, or a lot more in some cases, on like the physiological, the jump scares and the dark locales, the dark shooting. Anyway, I'm on a tangent here, but yeah, Spring's a good movie.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely can like see this, and like I think bringing a film like Spring to a podcast that dives into mental health is also a perfect outlet
Hmm.
as well, because so much of Evan's journey is essentially trying to find community and purpose.
Yep.
Because uh, I, like the first like 10 minutes of this felt so akin to Up from
Hmm.
Pixar, that like I like watched it, and like his mom dies, and I'm just like, what has Nugs got me into? Like I'm not even here like 15 minutes and I'm already wanting to sob. And is but that really kind of goes on, and like so much of his journey is trying to find love, trying to find purpose, trying to find community. But it also explores something about um uh, the grieving process that I feel like is typically handled very comically. It's very much a like
Hmm.
blink and you miss it kind of moment. It's not very extended on, but that's kind of like the sexual manipulation that kind of comes after losing a parent, where like you can kind of like use it as like a jail free card, or like a pity card. And um kind of getting to see Evan go through that, that's something that I feel like is typically handled in like comedies. Like it's like you just lost someone very close to you, let's go have sex. It's like those two like are not like supposed to be in the same arena. And I liked how like that kind of element of it like was handled really like grounded, and allowed this story to really feel personal with Evan.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I really like about this is that it is a lot like slower paced. You really get to know basically the two characters in this. Um and even though there are like different locations that this is set in, they're not just in like one room like a lot of horror movies are. It still feels really intimate and like it almost is in one single little location because of the storytelling, the vulnerability of the characters. Um, and I just can't get over this film, I guess. It's one of my like all-time favorites, I would say.
If I may, um, I think that there's a bigger conversation to be had, about what you were talking about, Josh, regarding men, regarding how, their pain, their grief is usually used for comedic effect, and especially it's changing a little bit now, but I think that in the geopolitical climate of the last 5 years or so, the last 5, 10, it's kind of been open season on men. Like men have largely been dehumanized, en masse, because of the actions of a significant number of bad actors. But at the same time, it's painted us all with a very broad brush. And something like Spring has the moxie, I guess. I don't know what kind of language we use here, but um, to take a look at a man who is experiencing loss and who is looking for love, who is adrift in his life. And I think a lot of men, especially younger men, maybe in their 20s and stuff, can identify with those feelings and those sentiments, and uh, that that ache of absence. I think that a lot of us have felt that. We live in a world that we're between the stigmas of the past, where we're not supposed to be emotive, we're not supposed to experience much beyond joy and anger, um in the public eye, at least. And And the opposite of that, which is kind of like, I won't say a war on masculinity because that's hyperbolic, but like there's definitely there are definitely aspects of being a man that are socially taboo, aggression, so on and so forth. But I think that Moorhead and Benson do a really good job of making vulnerable men who are very human. And I guess that's all I had to say.
Yeah, no, there's a because I totally agree. Like it is this tightrope that you walk, and I always kind of tell people that anytime that I get behind the mic, like it's always you always have to like mind what you say
Yep.
Hmm.
because A, you don't know who's listening, and B, we live in a culture now where it's on the internet and it's forever.
Yep.
James Gunn is a great example of that,
Hmm.
going from, you know, preparing for Guardians 3, losing Guardians 3 because of past tweets, gaining DC, and then coming back for it. But not every story is like that. And so you do have to kind of really mind what you say. And it's I think we're getting to this like shift where it
Yeah.
feels like men are allowed to be more open and kind of like share their issues. You brought up Ari Aster earlier, and I don't know if you either one of you guys have seen Beau's Afraid, but Beau's Afraid really tackles this issue of like trauma and like uh the for lack of a better term like mommy issues that you
Mhm.
a can be a lifelong struggle. And there's a scene in this in particular where Evan has just gotten into Italy and he kind of begrudgingly befriends two local guys, and they're both drunk, and one of the guys says, most men don't share feelings like I do. And that scene in particular stuck out to me because when you look at the context of it, he's not sharing it because he's in the right state of mind, or whatever. He's sharing it because he's drunk. And again, I think
Hmm.
that doubles down back to this idea of men's emotions almost kind of being this punchline where you can't emotive everything yet. Like we're a little bit better equipped in 2023 than we were, 10, 20 years ago, but still like there's this expectation of not showing emotion because that's what's ingrained into our culture.
Hmm.
Well, I mean, we still have the standard in media is still that it's okay to slap a guy on camera. You know, it's in plenty of comedies. It's in comedies all the time, actually, is men getting hit in the face, like we don't enjoy the same social protections, especially when portrayed in media. Um, and I'm glad it's changing. I'm glad that we're being slowly like extricated from violence. Like we are not inherently violent creatures. You know what I mean? Like we're capable of love. Our default state, as far as I'm concerned, is love and loyalty and stuff. But
Yeah.
that's not what this is about.
No, but
It's
this
not.
movie does touch on that aspect because, I mean, like we've been saying throughout this whole conversation so far, these topics he would have been a punchline, but they're handled respectfully. It would be the best word for it in this.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text help to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us. I think like a story like what Spring is trying to tell with it, with both Evan and Louise, only happens when you have this more intimate settings. Uh,
Mhm.
Stories like this, because you allow the characters to grow, and that's one of the things that I think that like Moorhead and Benson do really well in terms of storytelling is, I go back to the other two films I've seen, Synchronic and Something in the Dirt. Something in the Dirt is literally just the two of them finding a wormhole and kind of like the consequences of that, and like questioning like their own morality and their own mortality, and like the questions that plague us all in terms of the afterlife and this life as well. And when you look at Synchronic, it's also like addressing like a drug epidemic, but also at the same
Mhm.
time it's only being told with really two people, and you're allowed to tell these really larger than life grand scope stories because there's an intimacy that is refined for. So one of the things that Emily, you brought up earlier, the it's like large scope
Mhm.
of like the drones and like how beautiful this movie looks. And I think it definitely like it spans like multiple countries, and it definitely has this very cinematic, very blockbuster feel about it. But at the end of it, you have two people that are essentially looking for the same thing. And I think that's one of the things that really hooked me about this movie, is the fact that Evan is this guy that is grieving and going through his own emotions, and he's trying to figure out how to articulate them. And Louise is essentially trying to figure out how to do life now with this guy that kind of came in and like thrashed her plans.
One of the things I like about Spring is that if you were to remove the supernatural element, that story could still happen. That story progresses because of who they are, not what they are.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that, we've been like talking about all of the like emotional and the beauty of it, but this is a horrific movie when you really get to the brass tacks of it. And their use of practical effects in this is so well done. And it is the perfect example of understanding your budget, putting it where it needs to be, and then practical effects on practical effects.
Yeah, practical effects to like get down, like understanding your budget is one of the hardest things that I've found, especially when you're telling a story this grand. Uh, you know, I am the director of our film festival here, and I see a lot of independent films, whether it's for the film festival or it's for YouTube or whatever have you. And sometimes like practical effects work really well, and other times you could be like, oh man, like this is campy, like
Mm-hmm.
there's this clearly like they didn't understand the budget, they're playing this for comedy. But there's so much about the way that they shape the practical effects in here, and like this like the subtleness of how they frame certain shots too, to where
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at it, that's why I thought this movie was a werewolf movie the first time. Did you guys like can you guys remember the first time you saw this? Did you think this was a werewolf movie?
Oh, yeah, we were guessing the entire time because we like to, if we have to watch a movie at home, especially a horror movie, we like to try and talk and guess like who the killer is or like what type of genre it is. And we were both like werewolf movie right off the bat. And then other things happened and we were like, oh, oh man.
Yeah, it was it blew me away the first time. You know, I don't say that lightly, but I was very impressed by that film. I was very moved by it too.
Yeah, I know like I'm like dying to do it. So like if you guys haven't seen Spring yet, this is your official spoiler warning. We're tearing this off. It's a little bit of an older film, but yeah, she's like this like weird like how would you say it? Like she's not quite a siren, but she's like not quite
She's Darwinism embodied.
Yeah,
fair
because
enough.
she has to she's able to live forever as long as she gives birth. So she has to like sleep with mortal men. And like that's what keeps her.
So essentially, the way her immortality works is she gives birth to herself,
Yes.
um, which I took to be the double meaning of the title. Spring, obviously, um, but then she is also the wellspring of
Mhm.
of life. Like, and she, yeah, I guess the spoilers out of the bag, but she has basically the entire like lexicon of DNA that's on this planet inside of her, and she adapts to things like she can become ichthyan, she can become reptilian, she can become like a feral mammal, like, and she can have any combination. Like she's like a chimera on demand, basically.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like really like caught me off guard was like you see it and then like they kind of like explain the condition afterwards. And I feel like it made me appreciate so much more of the
Mm,
journey of not only her like before the actual reveal, but like the actual like character design of the monster as well.
Oh yeah, the scene in her apartment when she's on
mm.
the kitchen floor, I was like, oh, I don't know if this is a video or or people are gonna be able to see my reaction, but like it was that gnarly, like, stank face, like when you hear a really good breakdown in a metal song, you're just like, mm. Like,
Which again, back to practical effects, had that impact because it wasn't like CGI or like they didn't like pan away from it, which they do sometimes in this, but for like the good effect of not giving away the monster right away.
I think you need that because like less is
Mhm.
more. And like that also goes to like back to your point about like understanding budget because when you look at it, like she's really only the monster for like one shot. And then you have like the shot of her like in the church when she's like starting to like
Mm,
transform a little bit. Practical effects look fantastic there. But like there's only like really like two shots where you really like see
yeah.
truly the monster and like they just like were able to use like shadows and like certain camera angles to kind of like
Mhm.
keep you guessing.
yeah, and I'm a big film nerd, but like their
Sure,
use
same.
of like depth of field, I was just like, this is a dream. I'm in a dream. This is so beautiful. Like such soft focus all the time. Like the like the bouquet over a lot of the shots and stuff. Just
Yeah.
gorgeous. Not shot like a horror film in the least, but that is to its benefit
Mhm.
as a horror film, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't know if like either one of you guys like felt this way watching it, but like the cinematography and kind of like how everything like like feels visually, it almost feels like it borders on like found footage. So you kind
Sure.
of
Yeah.
almost feel like this like fly on the wall because it doesn't feel polished, but it feels kind of like amateurish, but I say that
Lovingly.
not in a negative way, but like very much in like an independent feel, um,
Mhm.
to where like they understood what they were going for. And I think that like that feel of it allows for the kind of the big reveal in the kitchen to be like that much more like grotesque.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the focus is sharper than a lot of the preceding shots. And beyond that, it's a really good example of your vehicle matching your subject. Like, it's told softly and with like this like ambient soundtrack, um and then when it happens, all of a sudden it's just a fixed shot and everything is really sharp and in focus, and it's visceral both in its content and its delivery.
There's one scene in particular I want to geek out with you, Griff. There's one scene in particular that I love, and it's the scene where Evan's like standing over like the mountaintop and he's like looking down and he sees the dead goat like with the snake crawling through it.
Yep.
Like the imagery there like is just exceptional. It's so creepy and like so good. Like I wanted to just kind of like frame that shot and like hang it on my wall.
Yeah.
Well, it's the beauty of this film to me, as a writer, especially, is like usually horror traffics in death. Usually horror is scary because we fear death, we fear the beyond, and all that stuff. But like this was like, hey, life is savage. Like nature is savage. Procreation is savage. Like we live violent as well as die violent.
Which yeah, which is really interesting because like I saw this like quote from like Andy Samberg recently and he was talking about how when his wife was leading up to like giving birth, she talked about like every one of friends were like, "Oh, it's gonna be the greatest joy of your life. You're gonna be in for like a pleasant." And then the moment you give birth, he was like, "Everyone is it's just immediately welcome to hell."
Hmm.
And like that's something that like I think that you bring up like such a great point that we never really think about like how like we always try to like think of life being this like beautiful thing that can do no wrong, but like dude, when we talk about like the nitty-gritty of it, especially here for a platform like this, like
Hmm.
suicide's a thing that happens over 100 times a day
Yep.
Absolutely.
successfully. For every one suicide that's attempted, there are 26 more, or one every successful one, there's 26 more attempted. There are over 17 million people living with depression, anxiety.
Hmm.
Not to mention, we are living in an increasingly world where it seems like mass shootings are happening literally every day. And
Hmm.
so you're kind of getting to see really how, to use your terminology, like savage this life really is. And like, you know, procreation and like all of these things that you mentioned, like they are beautiful in concept, but when you're going through them, they're only beautiful as a reflection. They're not
Yeah.
necessarily
Yeah.
beautiful in the moment.
Yeah. And as
Oh,
someone who has given birth, it is very intense and not beautiful at all. I mean, like, okay, so it is beautiful, but like, no.
We you also got to save that conversation for the next episode.
Exactly.
So we're talking about Clock in 2 weeks. Check it out. It's now streaming on Hulu, so you guys go check it out and watch it beforehand.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that like Griff, you bring up a great point about just the savagery that I think we try to ignore it, honestly. Try and just kind of plan to see that it just doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at what we were just talking about. Everyone says that birth is so beautiful. And then when you actually get down to it, it's
geez.
absolutely horrendous. And so it's like we like to think that it's beautiful, but we're kind of like lying to ourselves to make it better, even though it's really intense.
Well, I disagree. Not that it's not brutal, but like I think that I think it's too narrow a definition of what beauty
Sure.
is. You know,
Yeah.
Hmm.
beauty and violence, beauty, and horror are not mutually exclusive concepts.
Yeah, no,
And
I agree. Like just to kind of like jump into like tropes, like I think I think high school is like also like another good example. Like
Hmm.
everyone kind of talks about high school's the greatest years of my life, but if you were like bullied, you don't necessarily view that way. Like, now it's cool to be a geek, but that wasn't always the case.
not even close.
Not even, oh my God.
No.
I got bullied relentlessly in high school. And now look back and I'm like, I would be cool as all hell now.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
Yeah. High school's nowhere near as cool as this movie, though.
No.
Bringing it back. How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Spring, I think it's deeper than it seems at first, and it seems fairly deep, but it's got a lot to say,
Mhm.
and it doesn't use anything as a cudgel to say it. Like it's a subtle movie, and it warrants like a few watches, I think.
It's definitely better the second time because you
Yeah.
like knowing everything. You go in and you're like, oh my God, everything like that was right in front of my face. Oh my God, I didn't notice that. And it just makes, I feel like it has a bigger impact the second time.
It's one of the things that I like about being a cinephile is going back and like looking at films
Hmm.
and like being like, oh man, like I really loved this the first time. And now like I'm noticing like all of these like subtle things like Lost Highway's become like one of my favorite films in the last few years. And that film, you watch it the first time, you're just like, oh crap. And then like you get to watch it like a second and third time, and you're just like absolutely like seeing like all of these like nuances that Lynch is able to do and just like piece
Hmm.
together. And like I agree, like I've only watched it once, but I definitely think that like Spring is gonna be a movie that warrants a rewatch because like it again, it feels like a lot deeper, but it feels like one of those like movies that like you miss a lot because you're so much in shock with how all of the events play out in the first film in the
Hmm.
film.
It's interesting because for me, like I've spoken to quite a few people who didn't enjoy it at all, and I'm noticing this kind of like schism in the horror community at large. A lot of people who kind of like how do I say this? So I personally have a few friends who don't share my taste in horror at all, uh, but they don't think that it's horror unless it scares you, like physiologically scares you. Um, and I'm like, man, a lot of horror today is like to horror what like going into the audience and tickling someone would be to comedy. Like
Hmm.
it's playing on your physiognomy. It's like, hey, we know that you'll jump at a loud noise, and I think that's a cheap out personally.
Yeah, I agree. Like I feel like the horror that like has grabbed me in recent years have has been horror that are is telling stories like Spring. Um,
Hmm.
like I want to watch a horror film that's not going to like not that I don't necessarily like being scared. Like I've definitely come into films in the last 10 years that have scared me and gotten under my skin. but there are the movies that I feel like really kind of get to me are the ones that like play on my emotions or like dig up like past things that have brought me legitimate fear. I talked
Hmm.
about this. It's connected too. So like Lou Taylor Piducci, I think I said that name right. He plays Evan in this movie, but he was also in the Evil Dead remake, which we covered a
Yep.
couple
Hmm.
episodes ago. And I shared why that movie really kind of got under my skin is because like I've had a lot of friends that have been in the recovery community and I
Hmm.
know what that journey's like. And so like that really resonated with me. And so like I'll probably share it a little bit more at length too with our next episode of Clock, but like that's one of the reasons that that film like really like resonated with me is because of its themes and stuff like that. So hit the subscribe button below, check it out. We drop it at the end of the month.
Exactly. Well, and not to go too much into another movie, but with the remake of Evil Dead, that one was a lot more real. Like it was a lot darker in tone. It wasn't as campy. So that one definitely has like way more of an impact, even if you don't personally know anyone in the like recovery community. And I actually enjoyed that aspect, but when I first saw it, it made me feel like garbage afterwards.
Well, I
I
mean,
need a shower.
it's by design, the invasiveness of what happens to Mia in the first place. Um, and then kind of like her journey through, the horrible things that happen is it's a pretty apples to apples metaphor for addiction and for the helplessness and the corruption that you go through. And people lose their trust in you, and you friends become enemies. And no, I don't personally have any anecdotal um experience with addiction, thankfully. But I definitely have people that I love who have dealt with that. I took the exit that you guys took.
I no like you brought up Arya Aster earlier and like Hereditary definitely like
Mhm.
made me feel that way like because I've known like the I feel like this with Hereditary and even with what Evan goes through here like the just the weird places that grief
Mhm.
takes you, but like also the same spot, like what it does to your like mental health. And I've shared it on here plenty of times, but I lost a friend to suicide when I was 17. It's part of the reason that I started doing mental health advocacy and started this nonprofit was uh you just have this like sense of like helplessness that like that
Mhm.
feeling that he describes at the end where they're on the beach.
Ugh.
I guess it's like not towards the end, but like he's kind of given his backstory to Louise and
Mhm.
on the beach, and he talks about like dad died when I was really young, and I came back from college and my mom died a few months later, and like there's just this like helplessness to him, and like that's what it feels like to lose someone to suicide.
Mhm.
I guess like any grief, really, any death, but like suicide is the one that just feels like the biggest loss because like it could have been prevented.
Yeah.
If I can wax personal for a second, I have major depressive disorder. I've had it my whole life. And there have been a few really, really dark times where I was like, that's probably what's going to get me is I'm probably going to, you know, take a long jump off a short rope or something. And I don't mean that's gallows humor, no pun intended. I was also in the military, so you'll have to forgive me. I'm probably going to sound a little dark and maybe a little cavalier towards this stuff, but it's coming from a place of having survived it. Um, but a lot of people think depression is sadness, and that is wildly, woefully inaccurate. Depression is being dead while you're alive. It is the inability to feel things. It is the absolution of despair. It is the utter absence of hope. A lot of people think that depressed people are just sad, and it's like no, it can chemically affect you and physiologically affect you so much that you can't get out of bed. You can't even perform basic functions. And then that has this Ouroboros effect where you become more and more down on yourself because of your inherent failures, you know. And of course, none of it's true, you know, and it's everything but a separate entity who's actively trying to kill you. And one of the biggest things, along with therapy and proper medication, since I got out of the military, that has really helped me is just visualization of my depression as a separate entity. I'm like, that's what I'll rally against. Like, that's where I'm going to dedicate my fury, my will to live. Sometimes just spite gets you through. Um, but depression is monstrous, you know, and it's just one of a cornucopia of things that people deal with. And I think that one of the best things that's happening to humanity right now, or at least Western culture, is that we are knocking down all of the gates, um, and all the walls involved with mental health, and we're starting to talk about it, and it's starting to very slowly, but it's starting to become a widespread belief that it is a real condition. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the it's all in your head crowd, which, like, it's so hard not to cuss, but like, duh. um like, yeah, it's all in my head, but that's like saying that a broken leg is all in your leg. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that doesn't change the fact that it's horrific.
No, I that's just so well spoken. And like
Mm-hmm.
I've also gone through like depression, and like there are days that there are days that we have that I have that are better than others, and that just that feeling of like, man, like I don't want to do anything today, or like just feeling numb, or feeling like you put it, like being dead while alive is like
Mm-hmm.
the perfect thing. And you know, I think that we see that a little bit here with Evan, and kind of like his like journey is to travel. And you know, my journey has been to the creative outlets like podcasting and talking about film. And I think that like there has to be, you know, therapies, medication, the resources. There's a mental health resource library right at your fingertips. Open up your podcast player, hit the notes, it's in there. Um, it's on all of our episodes, and it's about finding really what works for you, whether that is religion for some, like
Mm-hmm.
myself, or whether that is creative endeavors, or whether that is just sitting down and talking to someone, mixture of two or three of those, or just finding out what works for you. Because the truth is, like, no matter how much depression makes you feel alone, you are never alone.
Absolutely. And like, it's also okay if some form of help doesn't help you. Like, that doesn't mean that everything is not going to help you. Because, like, some things that work for me do not work for Griff at all. And that is okay. And um, I don't want people to feel more discouraged if they find something that doesn't work for them. I don't want them to stop trying. And I'm really glad that the resources are not only available below, but, you know, cursory Google searches of help and text lines. And I'm really glad that those things exist now.
Yeah, and like I think you brought up like such a valid point too, that like a lot of people think, well, you know, I'll try therapy, but if it doesn't work right away, then I'm done. Or if this medication
Mm-hmm.
doesn't work right away, then done. And like the thing about it is that like you have to sometimes, we've done episodes about this in the past, like taking this idea and this concept of like putting it into practice, that like it might take five or six before you get, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like sometimes you get lucky, sometimes your therapist is great right away. That's what it was for my wife.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the medication you're on works literally right away, but
Mm-hmm.
that's not always the case. And again, like sometimes the creative endeavors, or the the mental health like strategies or creativeness that you're doing, the resources, like you said, Nugs, like sometimes it's not going to work, sometimes it will.
I would just like to say, one, thank you so much for having me. This has been head and shoulders a more positive experience than I was expecting. But two,
Yeah.
you seem like someone I'd love to get to know, Josh. So I really appreciate the chance to come on here and have this discussion because it's so important and it's so rare to meet people who even want to come to a table of discourse, let alone approach that with kindness and compassion and open mindedness, with the purpose of making the world a little brighter place, at heart.
Well,
Mm.
first off, thank you for your kind words. You're always welcome to come back at any time. Um, Second off, I don't want to take all the credit because if Nugs would never have answered my email a year ago, none of this conversation would be taking place. So so she has some hand in this. But yeah, no, I mean, I went through a lot of it. I went through bullying as a kid. I went through depression and anxiety. I still struggle with anxiety to this day. I've been open about like my struggles with addiction, and like depression and like my also like my past desires for suicide as well. Like and
Mm.
you know, losing to someone with suicide, but also like being married to someone that also goes through those same issues, we
Mm.
really wanted to bring a safe place to have these conversations. And I feel like it's not just movies like Spring, because I mean, we've talked about like we just did Evil Dead 2, which is hella campy a few weeks
Yeah.
ago. And
And terrifying.
yeah, but like you
Scares
also
me so
like
bad.
it also like brings up these conversations that like these characters are all going through their own mental health journeys. Like there's always like mental health subtext and like
Hmm.
fandoms are a great way to have these conversations because you are presenting something that is a taboo, stigmatic topic through the
Hmm.
familiarity of something like pop culture.
Yep.
So with that, I feel like this is a really good stopping place.
All right, Griff, we'll hit us one more time with the social medias for you.
Okay, so again, it's the House of Everlasting Shadow on basically every platform. Um, Not only is that where I host my creative endeavors, but it's kind of the brand that Nugs and I run together now. And
That's right. We stream together, and that's what we stream under.
Yeah, but beyond that, I don't know if this is okay because it's another podcast, but I'm also one half of a podcast called The Writing Endeavor, that is all about the craft of writing, everything from movies to mainly books because my co-host Will and I are both authors, but video games, anything that is written, um, we cover that as well. And every other week we do a piece of our own writing live, or I guess on the podcast, and then we critique it together. And
Nice.
uh, but yeah, that's kind of what I do. A little bit of everything.
It's awesome. Well, we'll provide links in the bio, the descriptions down below where you guys can check out Griff and all of his streaming adventures, writing, and podcast as well. Miss Nugs, where can people find you online?
That's right. You can find me under Nuggs-the-Final-Girl across all platforms or Linktree slash NTFG. And how about you? Where can
You
people
guys can
find you?
find me. I'm on one place currently right now. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, and you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcast from, as well as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And you guys can follow us, Abyss Gazing, wherever you guys get your podcast from, because we have our own feed now. So make sure that you guys
Yay.
subscribe. And until next time, remember the longer that you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.